Listening has really grown on me in the last couple years, particularly during the pandemic. My opinion of listening has really evolved over the last 10 years or so, in that now I make it a much bigger part of my language learning experience, and it's really integral to my growth. Before, I thought of listening practice as a chore, as a waste of time, but with the years, I've realized how important it is and how big of a mistake I used to make by trying to avoid it, by minimizing it. So originally, my failures with listening came from my French language course in high school. The big problem I had with French, and still I feel its effects now with my listening comprehension in French, just by the nature of the classroom setting, I'm really only listening to the French language that my teacher taught me. She was not a native speaker, she was an American English native speaker, so you could hear that in the accent, and that's totally fine. I'm not saying she was a bad teacher, she was a great teacher. But that did overly expose me to American accented French and did not expose me enough to native French. So I had the huge problem around high school graduation and early university that I really could not understand French people when they spoke. They spoke so differently than my teacher. And this is not a problem because the teacher was not native. Of course, that compounded, but the real problem was in a classroom setting, you only listen to the teacher and the mistakes of your classmates. So you mostly have bad French as your listening example. That is the downstream effect of native, good French is harder to understand. In university, I took one French course and I totally felt different with my French when the teacher only spoke French. What this teacher tried to do in university was fully speak in French. As much as we knew, she tried to speak it. Of course, something like explaining the assignment, explaining really critical information was in English, but maybe 80%, 85% of the class was in French, and I noticed a huge improvement immediately. This was kind of a sign to me that maybe my old strategy was not working and I need to expose myself to more French listening, to more speakers, more native speakers. I went to high school in the early 2010s. Come university, post-graduation, there is multiple languages of everything on every streaming platform. It's really accessible. Now my strategy, especially around COVID and the start of this channel, I really started to change my listening strategy. The more the better. And there's quite a few effects that listening has had that's really helped me. There's quite a few accidental effects that I've noticed in my own language learning that are a direct benefit of increasing my listening input. One thing that's really helpful about listening is that it gets me into the mode of thinking and more fluidly speaking in that language. These days before my italki lesson in Turkish, I always listen to some sort of Turkish before the lesson. And how it's helped me in that Turkish lesson, I feel a little bit more open already because the words are flowing out a little bit more easily. My sentences are forming a little faster compared to if I were to switch to Turkish right now after speaking in English for a few minutes. I've made a video before about how I do not confuse languages much, and this is part of the strategy. You need to get into the mode of your language and slowly make your brain start thinking in that because, your brain wants to use the language it's been using for the last few hours. Just like exercise, you need to stretch before you do something serious. With language learning, you need to do a few warm-ups before you run a marathon. Something else that's really huge that more listening input has done is that it really consolidates the language learning I've already done. Before my lesson, these days I'm trying to watch a lot of the Winnie the Pooh series, which I've mentioned before. It's safe, it's simple, and I remember, separately from a book learning the word kocaman, which means huge. I remember from a song learning canavar. But in this Winnie the Pooh show, domuzcuğa göre her şey kocaman bir canavar. So I keep encountering those words that I just learned, and it kind of consolidates it. I see it a second time in a new context, and my brain realizes, oh, this is an important word, you should remember it. Whereas when I direct myself to memorize a word, sometimes it doesn't stick after the first or second or sixth or seventh time. Also, because it's likely you're on the upper beginner or lower intermediate level of your language, a lot of the words you are learning are super common words. It's very likely that in that upper beginner, lower intermediate stage, you are learning the language's like top 70% of words, top 2,000 words. It's very likely you're going to encounter them in media. It's such a good tool to consolidate that work you've already done. Another huge effect I've noticed is when I listen more, I stop using subtitles as an anchor. What do I mean by that? Of course, everyone's goal is to not use subtitles in their native language. A stepping stone to using no subtitles at all is to use subtitles of the target language. So the audio and the subtitles are the same. When you have subtitles in the target language, at least for me, I've noticed that my reading speed increases a lot, but my listening gains are really minimal. Of course, I'm gonna sacrifice some of the comprehension because I probably missed a really big chunk of the content, but that part of the content I do understand is completely thanks to my listening skill, not my reading skill. Me, this is the biggest problem with Japanese because I think my vocab's really good on account of all the kanji I've been drilling. But when I listen to people speak native speed Japanese, I find it super hard to understand them without like Japanese subtitles. But those Japanese subtitles then become like a crutch because especially in the case of Japanese, like the writing is a little bit more precise than the speaking, which has a lot of homophones. So for me, focusing so much on the Japanese script has actually taken away from my listening. What I need to do is watch something super simple, turn off the subtitles, and just practice more. It's been super helpful for my Turkish, where for my Anki, I always include vocab word with an audio pronunciation. And as I am looking at these cards more and more, I'm noticing myself depending on the pronunciation, the audio, more than the written word, which in my book is such a huge victory because that means I kind of listen just slightly better than I read. Slightly. That kind of is related to the other point I have, that listening for the most part for language learners is faster than reading. Yes, for natives, maybe they read faster than they speak. For, early level language learners, listening is much faster than you can comprehend and conjugate. It's really fast. So once you get used to that native speed, I found that comprehension kind of lags behind a little bit, but it does follow. Your comprehension gets much faster. Your understanding of this sentence, this structure becomes much faster as compared to if I read more. This could just be a personal thing, but I feel like listening contributes to my overall comprehension much more than the other skills. There's listening comprehension and there's reading comprehension, but I mean like both, kind of the ability to turn that target language and not need to translate in your head, not need to kind of parse the grammar, just being able to see that sentence and bam, you comprehend it. You don't have to do extra work in your head. When you write a lot, when you read a lot, that speed doesn't increase quite as much for me personally. It's kind of like that problem of I understand all those words but separately, like every part of the sentence, but like holistically you're having a problem like connecting them. Listening more like definitely contributes to reducing that problem. I've also noticed a huge benefit to the sentences I form when I listen more. Think about it in terms of examples. When you're a learner, the majority of your interaction with the language, especially at the beginning, is going to be your own creation. It's going to be the bad sentences that you make at the beginning. That's a majority of your interaction with the language. So ultimately, your goal should be to drown out those bad sentences that you've created with a lot of good sentences from listening to native speakers. Of course, not all natives have good sentences, but if your goal is to sound native, you need to increase your intake of those native sentences. So it really does make sense that your sentences sound more native if you've had more native examples. Therefore, if you do more listening, in general, you write and speak better sentences. You've just gotten more examples of the good stuff. Listening has really grown on me, whereas many years ago I hated doing it. It's so annoying. I can't understand most of what people are saying. If you stick with it, you're going to just naturally start understanding things better. So my message to my audience is try listening more. There's a lot of passive benefits you'll see in other parts of your language learning that are directly due to the listening. I think for a lot of shy language learners, we tend to read and write more because that's something you can do in the comfort of your own room and at your own pace. But you do need to pick up the pace eventually, so I think listening will benefit a lot of people. I think a lot of people avoid it a little too much. If you liked this video, please give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more from me. My socials will be linked in the description, which I implore you to follow for some fun language learning content. If you want to read more about topics like this, I do have a website at studywithalex.com where you can see a lot of blogs, a lot like this video today. So thank you for watching today's video, and I'll see you for a new one very soon. All right, au revoir.